The glass house was on what Claire had come to think of as the impossible travel network. Murney's doorway system led to a total of 20 places in town that she'd been able to identify, and one of them was in their living room. One, of course, was to the prison where he'd been making his residence lately. One was to the day house, and she suspected most, if not all, the founder house had similar connections. There was also a doorway to Amelia's castle, or at least Claire thought of it as a castle. She had no idea what it looked like on the outside. She didn't even know where it was in town, but inside it felt and looked old and very, very strong. There were exits in the system to the University Administration Building, to the library, to the Town Hall, and to the Elders' Council Building, which was where the ball was being held. "I can't believe we're doing this," Claire whispered, as Merlin contemplated the blank wall in the glass house living room. "Merlin, are you sure? Maybe we should take a car or something." "Well, this is Verster." That's not his voice. He said, "I'm not afraid, are you?" "No need, you're with me." He said it with effortless arrogance, and once again, she had that flash of chilly doubt. Was he okay? He seemed to be stringing thoughts together just fine, but there was something off. The sweet-natured Merlin who normally emerged during his brief bouts of sanity was gone, but she didn't really know this Merlin at all. But he'd given her holy water and a cross, and he didn't have to do that. Besides, she needed him, didn't she? It was too late for second thoughts. The area of wall where Merlin was staring fluttered and melted into grey fog. The fog swirled, took on colour, and became darkness with a line of hot gold light barely visible at the bottom. It looked like the interior of a closet. "Come on," Merlin said, and extended his hand to her. She took it, and they stepped through together into the darkness. Behind them, she felt the portal seal itself, and when she turned to look, there was nothing there. The place smelt like cleaning supplies, and as Claire swept her hand around, she came into contact with the wooden shaft of a mop. Janitor's closet. Well, she supposed it made arrivals a little less noticeable. Except for the part about sneaking out of the janitor's closet. Merlin hadn't stopped. He reached out and turned the knob of the door, then eased it open just a crack. "Clear," he said, and opened it wide. He stepped out first. Claire hurried to follow and shut the door behind them. They were in what looked like a utility hallway. Plain white walls and dark red carpet. All the doors were unmarked and identical. Claire tried to count, but to be sure she could find the room again. "This way," Merlin said, and strode down the hallway to the right. His white tunic billowed as he walked, and he ought to have looked ridiculous in the traffic cone hat, but somehow, he didn't. "I should have let you be Poirot, little Claire. Poirot is known for his sweet, innocent nature, not like Harry Quinn. A little bit of frenzy, Claire." "What?" "I said I should have let you be Poirot." "No," she says, "you said liberty frenzy. What does that mean?" I said, "What?" Merlin sent her an odd look. "That's nonsense, Aquilise. That." She stopped dead in her tracks, and after a couple of steps on, he realised she'd been left behind and turned impatiently. "Claire, iguana time." "Claire, we don't have time." "Merlin, you're not making sense. I think the serum is wearing off." "I feel acting." "I feel fine." "Can you hear yourself? What you're saying?" He held up his hand. He couldn't tell what he was making word salad. Neurological complications, she thought. And she wished she could talk to Dr. Mills. Of course, he did carve out part of his brain. That could have done some damage. Then again, he'd been talking fine up until these last few moments. Claire tried to keep her voice as calm as possible. "I think you need another shot. Please, I don't think we should wait to see how much worse you get. Do you?" Bernie silently held out his arm and pulled up his sleeve. Yet his exposed skin was alabaster pale, and as she took hold, it felt less like a human arm than soft leather of a marble. Claire took out the small case she'd stuck in the wristband of her tights, the one Dr. Mills had given her, and the syringe and vials of medicine. She practiced giving injections with a needle on an orange, but this was different. "I'll try not to hurt you," she said. Merlin rolled his eyes. Her hands trembled as she slipped the needle into the rubber stopper of the vial and filled up the syringe. She squirted a few drops of the liquid from the needle and took a deep breath. She hoped Merlin would let her do this without a fight. He didn't seem inclined to act out, At least not yet. He stood passively as she positioned the needle over the cold blue of his vein. "Ready?" she asked. She was really asking herself, not him. He seemed to know that because he smiled. "I trust you," he said. She pushed, and the needle popped through his skin and slipped deep. There was a second of resistance against the surface of his vein, and then it was in. She quickly pressed the plunger and yanked out the needle. A thin drop of blood marked where it had come out, and she wiped it away with her thumb, leaving a faint smear on his perfect skin. She looked up and saw his pupils shrink to nothing, and a feeling of utter terror swept over her, freezing her in place. Merlin's mouth was wide and red and smiling, and there was something about him that really wasn't at all right. Then it was gone, as he blinked, and his pupils began to expand again to normal size. He shuddered and heaved a sigh. "Unpleasant," he said. There comes the warmth. Now that's pleasant." "It didn't hurt, though?" "I don't like needles." Which was funny enough to make her laugh. He frowned at her, but she kept giggling and had to cover her mouth with her hand as the laughter reached higher and thinner toward hysteria. "Get it together, Claire." "Better?" she asked him. Merlin's arrogance was back, obvious in the look he sent her as she packed away the supplies. "I wasn't bad," he said, "but I appreciate your concern." The hallway ended up ahead in a pair of white swinging doors, and Merlin took her hand and practically dragged her toward them. "Wait! Slow down!" "Why?" "Because I want to be sure you're—" "Compos mentis? That's Latin, Claire. It means, in your right mind. Yes, I know. I'm not babbling nonsense. And I don't think I needed that shot in the first place." He sounded huffy about it. That was, Claire thought, the scariest part of it. Many really couldn't tell when he was slipping away. She hoped that this was the scariest part. Anyway, from the eagerness in Merlin's face, she was afraid it might get a lot worse. On the other side of the doors was the round foyer of the Elders' Council building, and it was packed. People stood talking, holding flutes of champagne or wine or something that was too red to be wine, all in costume, all masked. "You were right," she said to Merlin. "I think every vampire in town is here." "And everyone brought a little human friend," he said. "But I think you're the only one who has told the true reason." Claire caught sight of Jennifer first, who was preening on the arm of Francois, Bishop's protege. She was wearing a 60s costume of a tie-dyed halter top and tiny miniskirt, platform shoes, peace sign jewellery. Her mask was an afterthought, clearly. The whole costume's point was to show as much skin as possible without actually going nude. Good job, Claire thought. Francois clearly approved. He was dressed as Zorro, all in black satin and leather, with a flat Spanish hat. Near Jennifer was Monica, who'd gone as Marie Antoinette. From low-cut bodice to wide skirts, she tied a red ribbon around her throat, which made Claire feel a little queasy, and had a miniature guillotine in her hand. She was clinging to the arm of Michael, who looked, even with the mask, like he wished he was far, far away and anywhere but next to Monica. He was dressed as a priest, in a plain black cassock and white collar. No cross visible. Claire followed Michael's eye line across the room to a tall scarecrow, straight out of the scariest cornfield movie she could imagine, and a girl dressed as Sally from Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. Oliver and Eve. Eve looked like the perfect Sally, wistful, sad, stitched together by nothing but hope. And she was staring at Michael too. Oliver, on the other hand, was ignoring her to focus on everyone else, looking around. Claire slowly picked out a few more she recognised. Her mother wasn't anywhere to be seen, but her father was dressed in a bear costume, looking intensely comfortable as he stood next to a middle-aged woman. Vampire? Dressed as a witch. "Do you see Shane?" Claire asked, Merlin anxiously. He nodded toward the other side of the room. She'd already looked there, but she tried again, and after skipping over him 3 times, she finally figured it out. "Does your costume involve leather?" she asked. And he'd said, "Actually, yeah, it might." It really did. It involved a leather dog collar, leather pants and a leash, and the leash was held by Yasandra, who was in skin-tight red rubber from neck to thigh-high boots. She topped it off with a pair of devil horns and red trident. She made Shane her dog, complete with very dog mask. "Breathe," Merlin said. "I'm not much for it myself, but I hear it's quite good for humans." Claire realized he was right. She'd been holding her breath, and she let it out. her shock faded, letting in a cascade of rage. That bitch. No wonder Shayna looked so sick. She hasn't hurt him, Merlin said, speaking softly next to her ear. And you may be wearing the costume of Harley Quinn, but Cassandra is most definitely more of a devil, so be cautious. Bide your time. I'll let you know when you can engage with our enemy. Claire nodded stiffly. If she had any doubts at all about this was done now. She was going to get her friends and her family out of this, and she was going to personally take that leash out of Cassandra's hand and do something violent with it. I'm ready when you are, she said. Merlin shot her a mad, smiling look. Yes, he said. I think you might be, little one. They stayed to themselves, watching the others, and although others eyed them curiously, no one approached. Claire asked, better late than never, if people wouldn't recognise Merlin, even with the makeup. But she shook his head. I'm hardly a social fixture, he said. Emily, Sam, Michael, Oliver, few might know me by sight, but very few others, and none of them would expect to see me here. Especially as he twirled theoretically in white tunic billowing out around him. Poirot. Which made zero sense to her, since she still had no idea who Poirot was. But she nodded. Merlin saw one of the vampire women nearby watching him, and made an elaborate low bow in her direction. Do a cartwheel, he said under his breath to Claire. Do a what? I would ask you to do a backflip, but I'm almost certain that would be a problem. Cartwheel, now. She felt like a total idiot, but she fastened the elastic string to her matador hat under her chin and did a cartwheel, coming off in it and bouncing to her feet with a bright, trembling smile. People clapped and laughed, then turned back to their own conversations. All except Oliver, who stared intently. But at least he kept his distance. There was no sign of Bishop or Amelie, but Claire gradually identified most of the vampires she knew. Sam arrived, dressed as Huckleberry Finn, which went well with his red hair and freckles. He'd brought a girl Claire knew slightly from Common Grounds, one of Oliver's employees, probably the one who'd replaced Eve when she'd quit. For Sam's sake, Claire hoped she was someone Oliver could afford to lose. Miranda was there, dressed in ancient Greek robes with snakes for hair, and with her was a faded small man in a Sherlock Holmes costume. Charles, Merlin confirmed when Claire asked. He always did have a weakness for the damaged ones. She's only 15. Modern standards, I'm afraid. Charles comes from a time when 12 was a good age to be married, so he takes your age of 18 rules a little lightly. He's a paedophile, probably, Merlin said, but he's not on Bishop's side. Sam spotted them, frowned, and gradually made his way through the crowd to them. Merlin pulled off the comical bow again, but Claire was glad to note he didn't require a cartwheel this time. Samuel, he said, how lovely to see you. Are you? Sam visibly checked himself, because the question had probably been, are you crazy? And the answer was self-evident. Didn't Amelie tell you to stay away, Claire? He was coming anyway, he said. He broke the lock. I thought I ought to at least come along. Which was true, if cowardly. Explanation of how they'd come to the standing there. Still, Merlin gave her a look, one that clearly said, confess. I probably would have done it anyway, she said in a rush. I can't let my friends and my parents be here without me. I just can't. Sam looked grim, but he nodded like he understood. Fine. You've been here, you've seen, it's time to go. Before you're announced. Merlin was shaking his head. No, Samuel, I can't do that. She needs me. She needs you to stay out of it. Sam stepped up, right into Merlin's personal space, and Merlin's eyes turned a muddy crimson. So did Sam's. Go home, Sam said. Now. Make me, Merlin said in a silky whisper. Claire had never seen him look so deadly, and it was terrifying. She nudged him carefully. Merlin, what happened to binding our time? Sam's not the enemy. Sam would protect our enemy. I'm protecting Amelie. You know I died to protect her. That sobered Merlin up, at least to the extent that he took in a breath and stepped back. The white fro-fro of the Poirot costume made him look like the scariest clown she'd ever seen, especially when he smiled. Yes, Merlin said. I know you would, Sam. That will destroy you one day. You have to know when to let go. It's an art the oldest of us have been forced to master again and again. Sam gave them both frustrated looks and turned away. The crowd had thickened, filling the circular room, and Claire heard a distant grandfather clock striking. the hour. It seemed to go on forever in deep, sonorous bongs, and when it finished, there was a silence in the room except for the rustle of fabric as people jostled for position. The gilt-edged double doors to Claire's right opened, and a smell of roses drifted out. She knew that smell, and that room. A vampire's body had been laid in a state in that stage. She and even Shane had been terrorized there. Not her favourite place or her favourite memory. "The Lady Muriel and her attendant, Paul Grace," said a deep, echoing voice near the door. It carried to all corners of the room. Claire craned her neck and saw a short, round vampire dressed as an Egyptian being escorted through the doors by a tall man dressed in Victorian costume. The man doing the announcing was standing to one side, a gilded book open in both hands, though he wasn't consulting it. The maitre d' of the undead. "John of Leeds!" Oh wait, sorry, wrong person. "John of Leeds," Merlin whispered to her. "Excellent choice. He was herald to King Henry, as I remember. Impeccable manners." The next name was already being spoken, and another couple moved forward. Claire couldn't see what was beyond the door from her angle, but she saw the glow of candlelight. "It's going to take forever," she said. "Ceremony is part of the joy of life," Merlin said, and handed her a glass of something that sparkled. "Drink." "I shouldn't." He raised an eyebrow. She put her lips to the champagne and tasted it. Not sweet, not bitter, just right. Like light. Bottled. Maybe just one sip. The glass was empty by the time she and Merlin had drifted up to the front of the line. Claire felt hot and a little off balance, and she was glad Merlin had taken her arm. The herald, John, stood to Merlin's left, and he seemed mildly surprised for a bare second, then said with his unusual smoothness, "Lord Merlin of Conway, with his attendant Claire Danvers." So much for the subtle approach. Heads turned, lots of heads turned, and although vampires weren't given much to gasping, Claire heard the whispers start as she and Merlin swept into the room. It was cavernous, dark place set up ballroom style, with round tables and chairs and a large dais on the stage. Fine white linens, floral arrangements on each table, glittering glass and gleaming china. The entire room was lit by candles. Thousands of them, in massive crystal displays. It would have been magical if it hadn't been so scary. The pressure of all that attention, hundreds of eyes watching their every move, made Claire's knees feel like banks of water. Merlin seemed to sense it. "Steady," he said softly. "Smile. Head up. No sign of weakness." She tried. She wasn't sure how she managed, but when he released her next to a chair, she sank down fast. There was an empty table near the back of the room. As she looked around, she saw that Sam was seated not far away, and so was Oliver. Eve was with him, staring wide-eyed at Claire. She couldn't see Michael, unfortunately. She could see Shane all too clearly, because Cassandra was on the dais on the stage, and she'd brought Shane on his leash up the steps so that everyone could see him too. They were seated at a long table on one side. Francois and his date were on the other. Still no sign of Emilie, or Bishop. Claire's father started to get up from his seat across the room, but the vampires with him took his arm and pulled him back down into his chair, so the rules were no mingling, apparently. She wanted to go to him very badly, but when she glanced at Merlin, he shook his head. "Wait," he said. "You wanted to play the game, Claire. Now we'll find out if you really have the gal for it." "That's my dad." "I told you, this will be a test of nerves. Yours are on display. Calm yourself." Fine talk from a guy who let his eyes turn red when somebody was unthreatening a Sam gun in his face. But Claire concentrated on deep, slow breaths and kept her gaze turned down, away from temptation. "Ah!" Merlin said in a voice full of satisfaction. "They're here." It meant, of course, Emilie and Bishop. Emilie entered first from the right of the stage, a glittering sculpture all in a white so cold it hurt the eyes. She'd come as some sort of ice spirit, which was appropriate in so many ways. Her platinum hair was woven into a crystalline tower, and she looked delicate and fragile. On her arm was Jason Rosser. At least Claire thought it was Jason. She'd never seen him after a bath and a haircut, but she recognised the stooped shoulders and the walk. If nothing else, he was wearing a hooded brown monk's robe. She picked someone she could afford to lose, Claire thought. That's why she didn't pick me. It should have made her feel better about being left out, but somehow it didn't. Bishop centered stage left. He was dressed all in episcopal purple. In what else? A bishop's costume, minus the cross. He even had the tall hat, the mitre. On his arm, he had an angel, a woman dressed as one anyway, with fine white feathery wings that were taller than she was, and swept the floor behind her. Claire slapped both hands over her mouth to hold in the shriek that threatened to erupt. It was her mother. "Steady," Merlin said. His cool hand pressed her arm. "What did I tell you? Control yourself. We have miles to go yet." She didn't want to listen to him. She wanted to get her mum and dad, Shane and Michael and Eve. She wanted to get out of there, hit the borders of Morganville and keep on going. She didn't want to be here anymore. Other guests filled in the remaining seats at their table, and the two of them, Charles and Miranda looked dreadfully young and pallid under her snaky hair and Greek robes. She sat next to Claire, and under cover of the tablecloth, reached for her hand. Claire allowed it. Miranda's felt as cold as Merlin's and clammy with fear. "It's happening," Miranda said. "All the blood, all the fear. It's really happening." "Hush," said Charles, seated next to her and nodded at her plate. "Eat. Beef will build your strength." Miranda, like Claire, picked up the prime rib on her plate. Claire tried a bite. It was good, smoky, tender, just the right warmth, but she had no appetite. Merlin tucked into his with a frightening zeal. She wondered how long it had been since he'd had an actual meal, or wanted one. It led her to an erratic series of questions. Were there vegetarians in the crowd? Did the vampires cater to food allergies? As she nibbled dully on the bread, Claire saw Amelie staring toward them. At this distance, it was impossible to really see her expression, but Claire was sure it wasn't pleased. "I think Amelia's going to have us thrown out," she said to Merlin. "Oh, sorry." He chewed his last bit of prime rib. "She won't," he said with absolute confidence. "Aren't you going to eat that?" Claire gave up and passed her plate. Merlin began cutting up the meat. "Amelia can't afford a scene," he said, "and no doubt it will amuse Bishop to have me here." He seemed odd again, almost happy. Claire eyed him doubtfully. "Do you feel okay?" "Never better," he said. Dessert." The servants. Claire never did catch more than a shadowy glimpse of them, so they must have been vampires, delivered exquisite little martini glasses full of berries and cream to each place. Berries and cream were something that even Claire couldn't resist. She ate the whole thing. In between staring at Shane to see if he was eating, she didn't think he was. He wasn't moving at all. As after dinner drinks were delivered, blood for the vamps, champagne and coffee for the Amogoblin intolerant. Claire felt her anxiety ratchet up another notch. There was murmuring in the room, a rising tide of it, and she felt the swell of excitement. "Merlin, what's happening?" Miranda's hand grabbed hers again, squeezing so hard Claire almost yelped. "It's coming," Miranda said. "It's almost over." Before Claire could ask what she meant, Merlin touched her shoulder and said, "They're beginning the ceremony." John of Leeds had come out of the wings behind the dais, and had taken up a post at a dark wooden podium. He was wearing a traditional herald's tabard, Claire realised, just like in books and paintings. She half expected him to pull out a long, thin trumpet. He opened the book that he'd been holding outside the room instead. "Behold," he said in a deep, velvety smooth voice, "there comes to us on this day one who is worthy of our fealty, and as one we welcome him to our house." Bishop stood up. A curtain pulled back on stage, and behind it was a huge dark wooden throne, heavily carved. Bishop walked up the steps to take his seat on it. Claire's mother stayed where she was, at the table. "What's happening?" Claire said. Merlin shushed her. "As I speak your name, come forward with your tribute," John said. Maria Teresa. A tall Spanish woman dressed in a glittering matador's costume rose from her chair, took hold of the man she'd brought to the feast, and escorted him up to the dais. She bowed to Amelie and then turned to Bishop on his throne. She bowed again. "I give you my fealty," she said, "and my gift." She looked at the man standing next to her. He seemed stunned, frozen. Bishop looked at him and smiled. "Princely," he said. "I thank you for your gift." And he flicked his fingers at them, just like that. It was over. Vasily Ivanich, John of Leeds called, and the parade went on. Nobody got killed. It was like Merlin had said. A token. A gesture. Claire let out her breath. She hadn't been aware how hard she'd been holding it, but her whole ribcage ached. He could kill them, right, if he wanted? Right, Merlin said, but he isn't doing so. He looked grave and focused under his clown's makeup. I wonder what's stopping him. It was, Claire saw, going to stretch on for hours. She was glad they had seats because standing would have been torture. As John of Leeds called each name, a vampire would rise and lead his or her human up to be presented to Bishop. Bishop would nod, and that would be it. As life and death confrontations went, it was really boring, and that it suddenly wasn't. The first hint came when Sam mounted the dais with his gift. He bowed to Amelie, but he only nodded to Bishop. Murney made a slight sound and leant forward, dark eyes intent, and Bishop sat up straighter in his chair. I welcome you to Morganville, Sam said, but I'm not going to swear my loyalty to you. The hall went absolutely still. Not even the little rustles of fabric and clinks of cup on chine that had been noticeable at that point. Amelie, Claire noticed, had moved closer to Sam than she had to the other vampires. No? Bishop asked, and beckoned Sam forward. Sam obliged by one single step. Your lady will acknowledge me. Why won't you? I have other oaths. To her, Bishop said. Sam nodded. Well then, her oath to me will bind you as well, Samuel. I believe that will do. He eyed the girl. Leave the gift. He didn't move. No. Amelie murmured something to him, but it wasn't soft enough that it didn't carry to Claire's ears, despite the excellent acoustics in the room. She's my responsibility, Sam said. And if you want a gift, take what Morganville offers you. Freedom. He reached into the pocket of his robe-belted huck, thin, blue jeans, and pulled out a blood pack. Cassandra leapt from her seat, so did Francois. You dare! Francois snarled, and knocked the blood pack out of Sam's hand. Take that filthy thing away. Cassandra got hold of Sam's date by the hair, and yanked her away. She's the tribute, Cassandra said, and you have no right to deny her to him. He has no right, Amelie said. Every word was clear as crystal. But I do. Bishop's eyes locked with hers, and for a long, long moment, nobody moved. Then Bishop smiled, sat back to his... What? Sat back in his chair and waved. Take her, Samuel, he said. I find she's not to my taste after all. Sam grabbed the girl's hand, shoved Francois out of the way, and descended the steps back to the banquet hall floor. Murmurs bloomed in the darkness as he passed. He headed straight for the table where Michael sat, leant over, and said something. Michael replied, looking strained and a little bit desperate. Whatever the argument was about, it was ripping Michael apart to take the other side. Sam yanked Michael to his feet, and this time Claire heard what he said. Just come with me. Whether Michael might have or not, it was too late, because John of Leeds said Michael Glass of Morganville, and everybody waited to see what the youngest vampire in town was going to do. Michael took Monica's hand and walked to the dais. He mounted the steps, nodded to Amelie, and nodded to Bishop, not much in the way of obedience either direction. Ah, the Morel girl, Bishop said. I've heard so much about you, child. Monica, the idiot, seemed pleased about that. She raised her tall wig by doing a deep curtsy in those mile-wide Marie Antoinette skirts. Thank you, sir. Did I tell you to speak? He asked, and transferred his attention to Michael again. Your kinsman refused to swear fealty. What say you, Michael? I'm here, Michael said. But I'm not swearing anything. That was a long, tense moment. And then Bishop impatiently waved him off stage. Monica dragged her feet, simpering at the big, bad vampire. What an idiot, Claire murmured under the breath, and Minnie chuckled. There are always a few, he said. Thankfully, the next vampire was already on stage. He was a little more political than Michael. He welcomed Bishop as a guest to Morganville, but again, no pledges of loyalty. Bishop looked sour. Well, this is taking a turn for the interesting. I wonder how long he'll tolerate it. Not long, it seemed, because Oliver was next, and even though Oliver bowed, there was something forced about it. Something militant. Bishop sensed it. "What say you, Oliver of Heidelberg?" "I bid you welcome," Oliver said. Nothing more. He bowed again, mockingly. "Your days of ordering us about are done, Master Bishop. Haven't you noticed?" Bishop stood up. So did Francois and Sandra. "Bring your tribute," Bishop said, "and walk away, while I allow you to walk at all." And Oliver, the coward, dropped Eve's hand and left the stage, abandoning her. Michael, down on the floor, tried to go to her rescue, but Sam tackled him and held him down. "Get off me!" Michael yelled, and the two of them rolled into a table and sent the expensive china and glass flying. "You can't let him..." Francois and Sandra were closing in on Eve like hunting tigers, and she was standing, petrified, caught in Bishop's stare. Shane stood up and took off the dog mask Sandra had made him wear. He walked over to stand next to Eve, unhooked the leash, and let it fall to the floor in a slither of leather. "I'm done with this crap," he said, and extended his elbow toward Eve. "How about you?" "So done," she agreed. "Though I do love a good dress-up party. Can I have the collar when you're done with it?" "Knock yourself out." They were trying to be cool, but Claire could feel the menace up there, the hair-triggering violence just waiting to erupt. And Shane couldn't win. He couldn't even hurt them. All he could do was get himself killed. She thought to get out of her chair, and then his hand crushed her shoulder hard, forcing her down again. "No," he said. "Wait. They're my friends. Wait." He was right. Amelie stepped forward between Shane, Eve, and Bishop. "They belong to me," she said. "They are not Oliver's to give." "That argument could be made for anyone in this town," Bishop said. "Will you deny me any tribute at all?" She smiled slowly. "I never said that. Be careful, Father. You sound desperate." Claire saw Bishop's eyes flare red, then white hot. Amelie didn't back down. She turned her head slightly and nodded at Shane and Eve. Shane hustled Eve off the stage and down to the banquet hall floor. Francois seemed to get some silent message from Bishop, because he backed out of their way. Sam let Michael up, and in seconds, Michael was across the room to join them as Shane and Eve descended the stairs from the dais. Sam followed. That made a small group in the no man's land in the centre of the tables on the floor. "It's starting," Merlin said. "We're at the tipping point now. He knows he's losing. He'll have to act." And John of Leeds said, in that perfectly calm voice, "Lord Merlin of Conway." That was the head-turning thing again. Merlin got up from his chair and held out his hand to Claire. His eyes were bright, a little too bright, a little too manic. His smile scared her, and she didn't think it was just the makeup. "Ready?" he asked. She didn't really have a choice. She stood and put her hand in his, and walked toward the last thing in the world she wanted to do. Hello everyone, thank you for listening to the audio file or audio reading I've done of a Rachel Kane book. I'm putting this in there, so if you want to skip past this bit and move on to the next video, that's fine by me. This is just like a cancer plug, because I want to do this, as well as also I have to do this, because the thing you've just listened to is illegal for me to do without having a charity case behind it, which I don't want it to be like a situation like, oh, I'm only doing this for the sake of cancer, which I'm actually doing this for the sake of cancer, but I did cancel this series a long time ago. It came to my recent attention that I should redo this in a better format, and I feel like now is a perfect opportunity to actually restart this in the worst possible way. Back in 1st of November, back in 2020, Rachel Kane sadly passed away to a rare bone cancer called sarcoma. Now, in the description below is going to be a link that you can. It's going to be a link so you can support the research into helping people survive and defeat sarcoma bone cancer and soft tissue cancer cells and all that stuff. So that's just going to be in the description right there down below. It is in pounds for those American ones, but obviously PayPal and all the research still goes to the same thing, because once it's being cured, once they found a cure for it or found an easier solution for it and stuff like that, it does get sent around all around the world, because everyone works on the same thing. all over the world. It's just that this charity is based in UK. I live in the UK, so it still goes to the same goal to beat sarcoma for a long time, and I feel like this is the best opportunity to work with it for any Rachel King books that we do during the Morganville series or any future series that we do. Obviously, this is even going to be in the future series if we do them. So any book that we do by Rachel King is going to have this at the end, just to plug a little bit of a cancer support for people with sarcoma, because it is a rare cancer, and there is not a very good survival rate. So just putting that in there to help people or to support the issues that are out there, because I'm not going to get any money from these videos at all, even in like the present when I'm not getting any money of this recording, or in the future, if possibly I do. But this is not what I'm about. This is all about for what Rachel Kane succumbed to in the end. So hopefully that as a team together we can beat sarcoma and end one of the cancers that are killing people, because no one likes that. But anyway, have a good day.